Usually when we want to measure something about ourselves in the physical world, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah.
Like, it's wonderfully simple. You want to know your height, you pull out a tape measure. You want your temperature, you just use a thermometer. The numbers are right there. They're completely objective, and honestly, they're comforting.
It's a clean data point. I mean, you get your number, and you don't have to debate what an inch or a degree means.
Right. But then you step into the world of the human mind, you try to measure something like intelligence, and suddenly you realize that tape measure is completely useless.
Absolutely useless.
Today, our mission is to figure out why measuring human capability has been an absolute, fierce, dramatic scientific battlefield for over a century. So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive made just for you.
Yes, welcome.
We're taking a massive stack of research, primarily based on Chapter 18 of the NOBA Discovering Psychology 2.0 textbook by Robert Biswas-Diener, and distilling it to figure out what being quote-unquote smart actually means. Okay, let's unpack this. How did we even start trying to put a single definitive number on something as messy as the human mind?
Well, to really understand the tests we use today, whether you're taking a corporate assessment or watching your kid take standardized tests in school, we have to look at where this obsession started.
Right.
For a long time, over a century, the scientific community viewed intelligence as this singular, invisible engine of the mind. And the goal of our deep dive today is to trace how we evolved from that very rigid idea.
A single engine.
Exactly, into understanding intelligence as a vibrant, highly adaptable ecosystem. And more importantly, we'll explore how you, listening right now, can use that modern understanding to maximize your own potential and guard against systemic biases.
I love that framing. So if we go back to the beginning, it really kicks off around 1904, right? There's this underlying assumption that there just had to be one master dial controlling everything in your brain.
Yeah, that was the foundational theory.
Yeah.
It was driven heavily by a researcher named Charles Spearman. He noticed something interesting in the data. People who performed well on a vocabulary test also tended to perform reasonably well on math tests.
Oh, or like spatial reasoning tests.
Right. To Spearman, this wasn't a coincidence. He theorized there was a hidden, overarching mental capability powering all of it. He called it the G factor, standing for general intelligence.
The G factor. So his logic was basically, if you're smart in one room of the house, you're going to be smart in all the other rooms because it's all running on the same electricity.
That is a great way to look at it. He believed this G factor was the raw electrical current of your cognitive ability. And that sparked decades of intense scientific effort to try and capture this ethereal trait.
They wanted to put a number on it.
They wanted to pull it out of the abstract and put it on paper. Yeah.
Yes. Which brings up the sheer practicality of it all. Because right around that same time, you had Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon over in France, and they weren't necessarily trying to find a grand theory of human genius.
No, not at all.
They had a very practical problem. The government asked them to figure out which children were going to struggle in the standard public school system.
Yes, Binet and Simon were really the first to build a practical measuring stick. They decided the best way to quantify a child's capability was to compare them against chronological age milestones.
Like what a typical kid should know at a certain age.
Exactly. They observed what a typical 7-year-old could figure out versus a typical 9-year-old, and they built test items around those averages.
So if you are, say, 8 years old, but you can only solve the puzzles that a typical 6-year-old can solve, that tells the school exactly where you need help.
Right, and that very practical school placement tool gave birth to an incredibly powerful metric: mental age versus actual chronological age.
Oh, wow.
This was the blueprint for the traditional intelligence quotient, or IQ. Initially, it was a literal quotient. You took a child's calculated mental age, divided it by their actual age, and multiplied by 100.
But it didn't stay just a diagnostic tool for kids who are falling behind, did it?
No, it didn't.
Because it crossed the ocean, and a researcher named Louis Terman adapted it into the Stanford Binet intelligence scale. And he really, institutionalized this. He wasn't just looking for kids who needed help. He wanted to plot all of humanity on a universal, bell-shaped normal distribution curve.
Yeah, Terman shifted the entire paradigm. To put everyone on the same curve, he had to introduce rigorous standardization and norms.
Right.
And these two concepts are the absolute psychometric pillars of any standardized test you have ever taken in your life.
Let's slow down and explain how those actually work in practice, because the research makes a massive point about them.
Okay, think about it like a race. Standardization means everyone runs on the exact same track with the exact same weather conditions and the same stopwatch.
So it's totally
Right. If I take a test in a quiet room with unlimited time, and you take it in a noisy room with a ticking clock, our scores don't tell us who is smarter. They just tell us who had the better testing environment.
That makes total sense.
Standardization ensures the administration and scoring are perfectly uniform.
Right, so that gives you a raw score you can trust, but the raw score itself doesn't actually mean anything yet, right?
Exactly. If I tell you I scored a 45 on a test, you have no idea if I'm a genius or if I completely failed.
Yeah.
You need norms.
Norms.
Norms are the baseline created by giving that standardized test to a massive representative sample of the population. They show us what the average score is and how the rest of the scores distribute around that average.
Without norms, you can't place anyone on that bell curve.
Exactly.
Okay, I hear all of this, the standardization, the norms, the bell curve, but I have to push back a little on this early history.
Okay, let's hear it.
I mean, if we go back to Spearman's G factor, if G is like measuring the raw horsepower of a car engine, doesn't that completely ignore the steering wheel or the suspension or, how skilled the driver actually is?
That's a very fair point.
Right. I mean, these early tests were heavily biased toward verbal fluency and logic. Can a single number really capture human adaptability?
That is a brilliant analogy, and your pushback is completely validated by the history of psychology itself. The scientific community eventually realized they had a massive blind spot.
They were missing the whole car.
By obsessing over a single metric, especially one that heavily rewarded specific academic skills, they were essentially judging a car's entire real-world performance solely by revving the engine in neutral.
Yeah, because driving in traffic takes a lot more than just horsepower. So how long did it take for the field to realize they were ignoring the rest of the car?
It wasn't until the 1950s, actually. A psychologist named David Wessler looked at these single-score tests and realized they were fundamentally inadequate.
Especially for adults, right?
Right, especially for adults trying to navigate the complexities of real life. So he formulated the WAIS, the Ventler's Adult Intelligence Scale.
And this was a massive shift in how we define capability. He didn't just add harder vocabulary words. He broke the test into a spectrum of entirely different operations, like working memory, information processing speed.
Mathematical calculation, spatial reasoning.
Yeah.
He fundamentally expanded what SMART meant. He recognized that surviving and thriving isn't just about one master dial. There is a fantastic quote from him in the source material that captures this shift perfectly.
Oh, what did he say?
Wexler stated, "The global evaluation of intelligence requires us to look beyond simple academic performance and measure the operational adaptability of the human mind."
Operational
Yeah.
adaptability.
Right.
That is such a better metric than just, can you solve this logic puzzle? It's about how you use your mind to adapt to the situation in front of you.
And this idea of an adaptable toolkit was taken even further by researchers like John Carroll. He developed a model that separated our cognitive abilities into different layers. But the most crucial distinction he made for our everyday understanding is the split between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence.
Okay, let's break those down because this distinction explains so much about how we change as we get older. Fluid intelligence is your spontaneous problem-solving ability, right?
Yes.
It's how you handle a completely novel situation on the fly.
Fluid intelligence is your raw processing power in the moment. It's your ability to recognize patterns in something you have never seen before without relying on past experience.
Whereas crystallized intelligence is your accumulated database. It's the cultural knowledge, the vocabulary, the specialized skills, and, the lived experiences you have painstakingly built up over years and decades.
And what's fascinating here is how these two types of intelligence age.
Oh, right.
Fluid intelligence generally peaks in our 20s and slowly declines as our neurological processing speed slows down.
Yeah.
But crystallized intelligence continues to grow and enrich throughout our entire lives.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at how this plays out in the real world, the data is incredibly revealing. There was a massive study published back in 2013 in the journal Applied Psychological Measurement, and they looked specifically at corporate executive personnel and how they handled cognitive testing across different age brackets.
That study is a perfect illustration for anyone listening who might be navigating a multi-generational workplace or, maybe considering going back to school later in life.
Yeah.
The researchers found that if you just look at a general cognitive score, it does predict high-level workplace performance.
Mm.
But when you break it down by those specific subtests, the results wildly diverge based on age.
Exactly. They found that older executives or non-traditional students might struggle with the timed rapid processing hurdles on an exam.
The fluid intelligence tests.
Right. If you put a ticking clock in front of them and ask them to solve a novel puzzle, which is testing that fluid intelligence, they process it slower than a 22-year-old.
But, and this is the critical part, their analytical comprehension, their strategic judgment, and their accumulated knowledge are exceptionally high.
Yeah.
Their crystallized intelligence is a massive asset.
It's like comparing a super fast internet connection to a massive physical library. The young brain can search really fast, but the older brain actually owns all the best books.
That is the perfect way to put it. And it proves why relying on a single timed exam score is fundamentally unfair in the real world.
Right.
If a hiring manager or an admissions office only values rapid processing speed, they are heavily penalizing an older applicant while completely ignoring their massive advantage in complex comprehension and experience. Intelligence is a dashboard of different dials, not a single fuel gauge.
But if we're really looking at a dashboard of dials and we want to measure operational adaptability, we can't just limit ourselves to academic tasks, right? I mean, life isn't just math and vocabulary.
Definitely not.
A huge part of adapting to the world is how we process non-academic information.
Absolutely. Navigating the world requires us to process our own behaviors, our frustrations, and the complex social networks around us.
Which is exactly what Howard Gardner argued. He introduced this theory of multiple intelligences, basically saying, let's stop pretending the math and verbal dials are the only ones on the dashboard.
Right. He proposed 8 autonomous domains of talent. Things like spatial intelligence for architects, kinesthetic intelligence for dancers, musical, naturalistic.
Gardner was really trying to broaden our cultural respect for different types of capability, wasn't he?
He was. He famously stated we should spend less time ranking children by their general intelligence and more time helping them identify and cultivate their natural varieties of talent.
It's an incredibly humane way to look at human potential. And operating right alongside that idea is this massive framework that has totally taken over how we think about success, emotional intelligence, or EQ.
EQ is crucial because it steps away from abstract logical computation entirely. It is defined as the systematic perception, expression, and regulation of human emotion.
Right.
Can you accurately decode the nonverbal expressions of the person sitting across from you? Can you label your own internal psychological state? And most importantly, can you regulate your own stress to guide your behavior effectively?
I really think of EQ as having shock absorbers for your brain. You know,
Not like that.
having high emotional intelligence doesn't necessarily make the engine of your car drive any faster, but it keeps you from crashing into a ditch when the road gets rough.
The shock absorbers keep the engine on the road. And the data supporting this is overwhelming. Researchers recently combed through massive amounts of global data, a major meta-analysis from 2020, to see what actually predicts whether a student will succeed in a rigorous academic environment.
And what they found is mind-blowing. Emotional intelligence isn't just some nice-to-have soft skill.
No, it's not.
It is literally the third most powerful predictor of scholastic success. The only things ahead of it are general cognitive ability and conscientiousness.
And when you unpack the mechanism behind that, it makes perfect sense. Students with underdeveloped emotional skills face much higher rates of anxiety.
Because they can't manage the stress.
Exactly. They don't know how to downregulate their own stress, so they experience burnout, anxiety-based school refusal, and they're highly vulnerable to peer pressure. All of that social friction just drains their energy.
Right. If you are spending all your mental energy panicking about a social conflict, you don't have any focus left for calculus. But the students who master emotional regulation, the ones with good shock absorbers, they navigate the bumps, preserve their mental energy, and perform significantly better over the long haul.
And speaking of how we process challenges, we have to talk about the internal narrative we carry about our own intelligence. This is the groundbreaking work of Carol Dweck on mindset.
Oh, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. This is everywhere now, but understanding the actual psychology behind it is so important.
Dweck's research revealed that your internal psychological perspective fundamentally alters your functional intelligence. If you hold a fixed mindset, meaning you believe your cognitive capability is a permanent, unchangeable trait you were just born with, you will severely undermine your own resilience.
Because if you think your intelligence is fixed, Every time you fail a test or struggle with a project, your brain interprets that as permanent proof of your biological limits.
Yes.
You think, well, I guess I'm just not smart enough to do this, and you give up.
Exactly. It neurologically disincentivizes effort. But if you maintain a malleable growth mindset, you process difficulty entirely differently.
You see errors not as proof of your limits, but as essential mechanical steps toward mastery.
Right. The struggle is the actual process of getting smarter. As Dweck states, intelligence is not a fixed, unchangeable trait, but rather a dynamic mindset that grows when we embrace challenges and persist through failure.
And we have decades of hard data proving this plays out in real life. There was a longitudinal study published a few years ago, right, in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology.
Yes, Spengler and colleagues in 2018.
Right, and it tracked people from childhood all the way into their adult careers. They wanted to see what mattered more, the raw cognitive IQ score they started with, or their early behavioral habits.
And the findings were profound. While raw cognitive power certainly gives you an initial advantage, your functional behaviors, things like active engagement in the classroom, disciplined study routines, and how you approach learning, those predict your adult career potential and income above and beyond your baseline cognitive abilities.
Above and beyond, meaning it doesn't matter if you have a massive engine, if you never learn how to steer the car or change the oil, the kid with the smaller engine who works on it every day is going to drive further in life.
Exactly.
Intelligence is truly a fluid toolkit.
This raises an important question, though. If true capability is this fluid toolkit, heavily influenced by our mindset, our emotional regulation, and our habits, we have to examine what happens to that toolkit when society steps in.
Right.
What happens when society places negative expectations or unequal resources on specific groups of people?
This is where we enter one of the most historically contentious arenas in psychological science, the study of group differences in intelligence. Because historically, trying to find intellectual variances between different sexes or ethnic groups has been used to justify systemic bias and prejudice.
It is a dark chapter in the history of the field. But the modern scientific consensus is incredibly clear.
Extremely clear.
Biological or genetic factors do not account for the variations we sometimes observe in average mathematical or linguistic performance between different demographic groups.
Right. The research points entirely to a complex web of environmental variables. We are talking about vastly unequal access to educational funding, distinct cultural socialization practices, and disparate expectations placed on children from the moment they are born.
And there is a very specific, real-time psychological mechanism that drives these performance gaps in the testing room itself. It is a phenomenon known as stereotype threat.
Let's explain how this actually works in the brain, because it is terrifyingly effective at destroying performance.
Stereotype threat is a form of severe cognitive interference. It occurs when a person is taking an assessment and they become intensely aware of a negative stigma or stereotype about their specific social or demographic group regarding that very subject.
So they're taking a test and suddenly they remember, oh, people say my group is bad at this.
Right, and the fear that their performance might validate that negative stereotype triggers massive anxiety.
And if we think about the brain like a smartphone, that anxiety acts like a massive background app that suddenly opens up and starts draining the battery.
That's a great analogy.
The brain has a limited amount of working memory. If 40% of your working memory is suddenly occupied by managing social fear and biological stress, you only have 60% of your brain left to actually solve the math equations in front of you.
That is the exact mechanism. The anxiety artificially depresses their score by stealing their working memory.
Wow.
They aren't less capable, they are cognitively overloaded by the environment. But researchers have also proven that this threat can be mitigated. Simple self-affirmation exercises before a test, which restore a student's sense of individual psychological security, can shut down that background app and bring their scores right back up to their true baseline.
That's incredible.
Claude Steele, a leading researcher in this area, powerfully states, "The apparent differences in cognitive performance between human groups are reflections of social inequalities and psychological barriers, not biological limits."
Which perfectly sets up what I think is the most stunning, optimistic revelation in this entire field, the Flynn effect.
Yes. James Flynn was a researcher who noticed a wild anomaly in global data. He revealed that human IQ scores have been aggressively and consistently climbing worldwide for generations.
Wait, really?
Yes. Across almost all populations, we're scoring significantly higher on standardized tests than our grandparents did.
But our baseline human genetics haven't fundamentally evolved in just 3 generations. So if it's not the genes, it has to be the environment.
Precisely. A landmark 2001 study in the Journal of Educational Psychology by Dickens and Flynn explored this exact mathematical paradox.
Which
How can a trait like intelligence have high genetic heritability but still be massively altered across a whole population in just a few decades?
it's kind of like human height, right? Like height is highly genetic. But if you take an entire population and suddenly introduce modern agriculture, better prenatal nutrition, and pediatric medicine over 3 generations, the whole population gets taller.
Exactly.
The genes didn't change, the environment just allowed the maximum genetic potential to be reached.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Dickens and Flynn proved that modern social environments act as a massive multiplier for cognitive capability.
A multiplier.
Think about the world today compared to a century ago. We have better childhood nutrition, yes, but we also have complex visual media, interactive screens, shifting cultural expectations that demand abstract problem solving in our daily jobs.
It's constant stimulation.
Right. The modern environment is essentially a relentless cognitive gymnasium that our ancestors simply didn't have access to.
That is incredibly empowering to think about. It means that when a community or a university actively works to dismantle negative environmental pressures, when they provide robust resources, reduce childhood stress, and create inclusive mentoring, they aren't just doing something nice.
No, they are literally unlocking latent intellectual potential.
They are structurally cultivating brilliance that would otherwise remain dormant.
They are maximizing the genetic potential of the entire population. It proves that our cognitive capabilities are deeply, continuously reactive to the shifting currents of the environments we live in.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. So what does this all mean for you, listening right now?
Well, we started this journey looking at intelligence as a rigid, invisible engine, right?
A single horsepower number dictated by a tape measure. But as we dug into the science, we discovered it is actually a fluid, adaptable toolkit. It's a dashboard of many different dials. We've seen that your emotional shock absorbers and your willingness to adopt a growth mindset are massive predictors of your actual success in life, far beyond your raw processing speed.
Far beyond it.
And crucially, we've learned that environmental factors, the resources, the expectations, and the psychological safety around you play a defining role in shaping what your brain can actually do.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, building directly on that reality. We now know, scientifically, that true capability is deeply intertwined with the world around us.
Right.
So take a hard look at the environments you voluntarily place yourself in every single day. Your workplace, your social circles, the media you consume. If human intelligence is largely driven by environmental interaction and not just a genetic lottery, how might your current daily environment be actively shaping or perhaps severely limiting your own intellectual evolution?
It really makes you rethink everything. You cannot measure a mind with a tape measure because the mind you measure today might be completely different from the mind you measure tomorrow, depending entirely on the world you build around it.
The environment is the ultimate architect.
Thanks for diving into these muddy waters with us. Keep questioning those type measures, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.